We know that we have 3 different CSS layouts. So far, we've covered 2 of them, which is the box model and Flexbox. Today, we'll be moving on to the last one, which is grid. Now, what we have in front of us is some dummy text inside a div, which is inside a container called grid. Now, inside this file.css, we have some basic CSS, and what this code means over here is that all the div that has an odd number will be colored in red. So basically, I have 6 divs, 1, 3, and 5 will be colored in red, and this is the website in general. Let's go ahead and start by saying display and set it to grid. Now, nothing will happen in my browser if I go ahead and refresh it, but if I go back to my CSS file and I will say something like grid template columns, and I'm gonna set 2 values, so 70% and 30%. Let's go ahead and see what they mean. Basically, I have 2 columns. The first one takes 70% and the second one takes 30%. But why 2 columns? Because we only specify 2 values. What if I specify 3 values? So 60%, 30%, let's say 10%. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser, and of course we will get 3 columns, okay? Now basically on the first row we have 3 divs, and on the second row we also have 3 divs. 60%, 60%, 30 and 30 and 10 and 10. Now I'm gonna go ahead and stay with 70% and 30%. Now what if I want to add a gap between my 2 columns? All I need to do is go to my CSS and add column gap. So I'm gonna write column and gap and set a pixel value, let's say 20 pixel. And let me go ahead, refresh the browser, and as you can see we have a gap between my 2 columns. Now let me go ahead and add a gap between my rows. I'm gonna say row gap, and I'm gonna specify a pixel value which is also 20 pixels. And I will refresh the page. As you can see, we added a gap between my rows. So basically I have 2 rows and we have a gap between them. Now there's a shorthand for this. I could go ahead and write, instead of all of this, I could say grid gap. And because I have column gap and row gap the same values, I'm going to write 20 pixel. And basically if I go ahead and refresh the page, nothing will happen. But if I want my row gap to be 40 pixel and my column gap to be 20 pixel, right now the row gap will be greater than the column gap. So 40, 40, and 20 for the column gap. Now I'm gonna delete this and set them all to 20 pixel of gap. Now instead of percent sign, I'm gonna use fractions. So I'm gonna say 1fr, 1fr, and 1fr because I want 3 columns. Now if I go ahead and refresh the page, all of them will have the same proportion, and of course we have the gaps between the column and the row. But if I go ahead and say 2fr over here, basically those 2 will be greater than the others. Let's go ahead and see it. And yep, they are larger than the others. Now, let me ask you this question. If you want 6 columns, will you write 1fr 6 times? Well, basically not. Why? Because you can go ahead and say repeat. Right now, you're gonna specify how many times you're gonna repeat the operation or the 1fr. So I'm gonna say 3 times, and I'm gonna mention what to repeat, which is the 1fr. So let me go ahead and refresh the browser. Basically, we'll have 3 columns, and each one will have 1fr. Now let us say you want to change the height of each of these grid elements. It is too easy to do it. All I need to do is say grid auto rows. And I'm going to specify a pixel value of 100 pixels. Let's go ahead and see it. If I go ahead and refresh the page, as you can see, their height increased. Okay, but what will happen if I go to my HTML file, copy this lorem dummy text and paste it a number of times, I don't know how much, and let me go ahead and refresh the browser. So basically the height is shorter than the text. So what will be cool is that the height can match up with the text. What I can do is, I will go to my file.css, and instead of 100 pixel, I could add something called min-max function. And inside, I will add 2 parameters. The first parameter will be the default height, which all of the grid elements should have. But if one doesn't have this height, it will stretch to fill. And how to say it? We'll just say auto. Let me go ahead and refresh the browser. As you can see, this looks ultimately better. So by default, all of the grid elements will have 100 pixel. But if one of my grid elements pass that value, it will stretch to fill because we added this auto. Now I will go to my second div, and I'm gonna put it inside a class called second grid. Right now I'm gonna write div, and inside of it I'm gonna have hello world. And make sure to close this div, and I'm gonna copy and paste it 2 times. Right now I'm in my CSS file. I just added some styling just basically to see them good. And if you go ahead to my browser, there they are, hello world, and hello world. Right now let's go ahead and add the display grid. So dot second grid, and of course it will have a display of grid. Now what I will do is I want to add 3 columns. Basically we know how to do it. So I will say grid template columns, and I'm gonna say repeat because I want 3 columns, and all of these 3 columns will have 1 FR. And right now let's go ahead and specify a grid gap. So grid gap will be 20 pixels, and let's go ahead and specify a height. So grid auto rows, and it will be, let's say, 50 pixels. And before I go ahead and refresh the page, I'm gonna copy those and add them 6 times. And basically we have 6 grid elements. And what I showed you right now is basically a grid inside a grid. So let's say nested grids. Now I've deleted the other example, and let's go for a new one right now because I want to teach you something else. So we have our grid, and inside I have 4 items. Now I'll go to my CSS because I need to add some columns for it. So file.css, I'm gonna go ahead and say grid template column, and basically we know how to add a column. So I'll say repeat 3 and 1 FR. Now let's go ahead and add a height for them. So grid auto rows. Let's go ahead and say min max. And I'm gonna say 150 pixels is the default value. But if one passes this value, I'm gonna say auto means stretch to fill. Of course, I'm gonna add right now a grid gap. Let's say also of 20 pixels. And there it is. This is my grid or my grid items. Now we can change the alignment of these elements. So if I go ahead and say justify items and say start, let's go ahead and see what will happen. So what will happen exactly is it will align them to the left side. So as you can see right now in front of you. Well, we also have center and end. Let's go ahead and try the center. So I'm gonna say center, refresh the browser, and they will align to the center. Now if I say to the end, they will align to the right side. So let's go ahead and try it out. Well, basically it will align horizontally to the right side. Other than justify items, we have align items. So I'm gonna delete this, and instead I'm gonna say align items. So align items, and we basically had these same values. I could say start, but when I refresh my browser, they will align vertically to the top, because when you say align items, you are working on the vertical axis, but when you say justify items, you are working on the horizontal axis. And there you have it. Now if I say end, they will align vertically to the bottom, and refresh the browser, there it is. Now we still have center, and they will basically be centered. And go ahead, refresh the browser, and there it is. And we also have align self and justify self. So what if I go ahead and say dot grid, and I will select all my div elements and add this pseudo selector with shield and child. I'm going to specify a number. If I say number 1, this is my first div or my first child div. I'm going to copy this one and paste it 4 times because I have 4 child divs. What if I go ahead to my first div and I'm going to say something called align self. And what this property allows is that we can align each item or each grid item by itself. So I can go ahead and say start for this one. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say align self. And I'm going to say for this one end. And right now I'm going to use the justify self. So justify, and I'm going to say self, and I'm going to say center. Oh no, let's say start. And this will also have a justify self. So basically I'm going to put it also end. Let's go ahead and see it. As you can see, there they are. The first item we set for it to align self, and we add it to the start. Basically it will align vertically to the top. And the second item we said it will align vertically to the bottom. And item 3 will align horizontally to the left because we said justify self. And the item 4 will align horizontally to the right side. So this is align self and justify self. They help you align each element on its own. Now let's do something different. I'm going to go ahead and delete all of this. I'm going to go ahead, save, and refresh the browser. Okay, let's go back to our CSS. Let's do something different. I'm going to say something called grid column. I'm going to add 1/3. Let's go ahead and see what this means. So it basically says go from point 1 all the way to point 3. That's all it says. And because we said column, it will go horizontally. Okay, so right now a horizontal line should appear in front of you on the screen, and it has number from 1 to 3. It should help you understand more this concept. So when I said 1/3, we mean go from point 1 all the way from point 3. Now basically, if I go ahead and say for this one, grid row, what do you think will happen now? I'm gonna say 1, 3 also. Let's go ahead and try it out. Okay, so what it did is, it will go from point 1 all the way to point 3. But this time vertically, because when we said grid column, it gone horizontally. When we say grid row, it will go vertically, alright? And right now, also a vertical line will appear in front of you with numbers from 1 to 3, and will help you understand even more this concept. Now, if I go to my CSS, and I'm gonna go for this fourth child or fourth item, I'm gonna say grid column, and I'm gonna basically add 1/3. Let's go ahead and see what will happen. And basically it will go from point 1 to point 3. Now I'm gonna add for this element a grid row. This time it will be from 3 to 5. And let me explain what that means. We basically said item 1 will go from point 1 to 3. If we say item 4 will go on the same track from 1 to 3, it will overlap it. That's why we will say that item 4 will go from 3, 4 to 5. Alright? I hope that makes sense. If not, there's a vertical line that will appear in front of you right now on the screen. Hopefully it will help you understand even more. Now let me go ahead and fix those elements. What I will do is, for the second child, I'm going to say grid row, and I'm going to say 1, 3. And for the third child, I'm going to say grid row. It will be, let's say, 3 to 5. Let's go ahead and refresh the browser. And look at this. It looks perfectly better right now. Basically, if it was an actual website, we could use item 2 and item 3 to be our sidebar, and item 1 and item 4 to be our main content of our page. Alright, this is it on CSS Grid. I hope you enjoyed it and got some value from this video. And don't forget to subscribe. Now if you guys want a full HTML and CSS tutorial, make sure to visit my full HTML and CSS tutorial playlist that will pop up right now. Maybe you are experiencing some crashes in your PC and wonder what are the reasons for this crash. Well, I recommend you to check out this video about PC crashes.